To the continuation of the council meeting for Monday, January 13th, 2020. Welcome to our first meeting of the new decade. By way of starting, I'd like to do our land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. Before we move on with more of our agenda, I'd like to just remind Council of the compassion that we will and interest that we will have when we're making decisions and listening to all voices that come before us this evening. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interests and the general nature thereof? Seeing none, we have no consent motions, nothing removed from the consent agenda. That brings us to item 12, which is the staff reports. You have in your package the report from GRAC regarding appointments to the GRAC committee, and I understand Lolita's in the audience if we have any questions. Are there any? There is no presentation, but are there any questions? Are you ready to move the motion? Thank you. Councillor Freeman, seconder. Councillor Vasek, all those in favor? And that is all of us carried. Moving us on to item 12B, City Utilities. Michael Puglisi, I understand you're making a presentation. Welcome.
Good evening, Chair Hamner and members of Council. I was just about to say there's actually no formal presentation this evening for the city utility rates. However, both Mike and myself just wanted to address a question that's come up from the December 9th FSP meeting. So myself, I'm just going to quickly talk about the question of data security and privacy that surrounds such a system as an AMI system. For the project that we've used and the recommendations that we've made to partner with Water North Hydro, we are tapping into a radio system that is a dedicated and private CRTC channel. And in itself, that provides a couple of advantages with concerns around data security. A dedicated and private channel significantly reduces threats from outside interference, and it's also easily detectable to see if any threat has been made or any type of other system has accessed that system. The data, when it's transmitted from a transmitter at someone's house through the radio towers to the database environment, is encrypted the entire way from point to point. And probably the biggest point that I just wanted to bring up around data security and privacy is that any data that is transmitted actually doesn't contain any customer information. So there's no customer names, there's no addresses, there's no geographic location associated with that data that's being transmitted. It is entirely just the transmitter ID and the water read, along with a little bit of information around the transmitter itself. So I hope that some of those points alleviate any concerns around adding an AMI system and data security. At this point, I'll just bring up Mike to talk about change to the fee structure. Yeah.
Thanks, Todd. Good evening, Council. Just you may recall in the past rate reports, we bring the report for information in December, and then we bring the report back for approval in January. At times in the past, we've made changes to that initial report based on feedback from Council. Just wanted to confirm, let you know that there has been no changes to that report from December 9th, just, so you don't have to check every single word or table. The only thing that did change was a small change in the fees and charges schedule in the appendix, in that it was more administrative, and for ease of ratepayers is that one of the backflow fees was combined. So it's the similar rate, nothing's changed from a dollars perspective, it's just combining the rates into one line for ease of clarity. So that's really, so other than that, nothing else has changed in the report from the December version you've seen. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, both Todd and Michael. Are there questions for Councillor Bodley and then Councillor Bonagar?
Thank you, through you, Chair Hammer. I just had a question that emerged from the last meeting with respect to a commentary from a resident regarding the AMI system, and it was whether or not there would be any intention or I guess any value in looking at water usage from a time of use paying structure in the future.
Yeah, through Chair Hamner, Councillor Bodley, we have no plans whatsoever at this time to enact some type of time of use charges for water, and that would strictly be something that council, we would only look at if council directed staff to do so.
Okay.
And sorry, just with respect to, is there any value from your perspective in such a system?
Okay, through Chair Hamner, yeah, Councillor Bodley, typically in the water AMI space, there's regions such as the southwest states that have water scarcity as a big problem, and so they do apply time of use rates for water consumption. We don't have that type of problem here in southwestern Ontario in general, so I don't think that there would be great value to that.
No further questions? Councillor Bonigar.
Thank you, through you, Chair Hanma. I find it a little difficult to bring this up. The AMI, it's primarily a customer service initiative. And it feels a little bit like a train that's hard to get off right now, but given the city's overarching infrastructure pressures, I kind of feel I'm forced to ask if customer service improvement is a strong enough rationale to go through with this project at this time. I do see the value in having this information. I believe in excellent customer service, but I also see huge competing demands for the money that we have available. So I'm wondering, should council decide to defer this project possibly to the next term of council, so beyond this 3-year budget, is the project still even feasible? Is that something that we could even be considering right now?
Through Chair Hamner, Councillor Bonigar, we have been investigating the AMI system for just over 4 years at this point. As noted in the council report, it's certainly an industry trend at this point. Yes, the primary benefit for sure is the enhancement to customer service, but that's also turning into a customer expectation. I would add at this point, when we try and address customer needs, we're often now met with, they're almost in shock that we don't have this at this point. And I think 4 years from now, that would only be heightened that much more. I would prefer maybe to pass this back to Chair Hamner and have perhaps council debate that merit, because staff have put forward this recommendation based on our analysis of an AMI system, and we've tried to display the costs as best we can, and it's now up for debate with council.
And Commissioner Patel has more information for us.
Through you, Chair Hamner, to Councillor Bonigar. The point I'd like to make is the EMI is funded through the water-based reserves, and the infrastructure investment that we're talking of and the 17 million gap that we talk of is on the tax-based side. So any decision that is made here with respect to the EMI project would certainly not be impacting the infrastructure investment that we're looking for as the budget that has been tabled. Sure, there is a bit of an infrastructure shortfall even on the utility side, but it is not as significant as we have on the tax side. So I wanted to put that in context too.
That was going to be my follow-up question was, if the money that's budgeted for AMI was somehow made available for other things, what could it have been applied to? And I understand, we do have needs primarily on the tax base, but we also have infrastructure issues through utilities too. So again, I was wondering, and if we did that, would that essentially cancel out the ability to even do AMI later? So would we be kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face should we delay it at the moment?
Go ahead, Councillor.
Through you, Chair Hanmer, I think to me, budgets are a tool to implement what other priorities that council have. And having read this report, I think there's certain environmental benefits also with respect to AMI. And I think that is another part of it that we cannot ignore. And just because we could be addressing infrastructure issues first and AMI later, we are not aligning ourselves with some of Council's priorities with respect to the environmental benefits that come from the AMI. So I would put that on the table too. I would leave it to the operational folks to speak as to whether AMI can be implemented thereafter or later on. The money, if you look at the charts that we have, we do have some money in the reserve. It's a question of council priority as to which one we spend first on.
Commissioner Rapp has some information to share.
Certainly, through you, Chair Hammer, to Councillor Bonagor. The other interesting point is that we can only spend this money on utility services. And the tax base, the road side of our capital program can't really even keep pace with the utility program. So when we do dig up a road for the replacement of a storm sewer or sanitary sewer or a water main, quite often it puts a lot of hardship on the tax base for the surface works, which is the road, the curb, the sidewalk. And currently that's not funded at a point where it can keep up, really. It slows down, if you will, part of the utility program. So to put more money into the utility program to rip up some of the infrastructure, it would put extra pressure on the tax base for the road component to catch up or keep pace.
Any further questions? No. Okay, all right. Any further questions regarding the utility rates? If not, Councillor Henry, can I look to you to make the motion for the recommendations as in our package? Seconder for that motion, please. Mayor Jaworski, any further discussion? All in favor, I'll call the question. And that is all of us. Carried. Thank you very much. Mayor Jaworski?
Well, I'd just like to point out that, I think it got lost a bit in some of the media coverage, but that even with this increase, we still have the lowest water and sanitary rates throughout the region by far. So I think that's something that we're able to do a lot with a little bit of money. So thank you to the team who were able to put that program together.
Great, thank you. Councillor Freeman.
If I could just add to that, I think it also is reflective of the fact that staff have maintained a system in good order, and that's helping to, keep our costs down. And so I appreciate the work that our staff do on our utilities side. I asked a question earlier about infiltration of fresh water into our sanitary system, and I know that a lot of municipalities aren't focused on that. We've been focused on it for a lot of years, and so I think that's another important point to point out, is that you've made investments over time, and that's helped drive those numbers down.
Okay, great. Thank you for those comments. That moves us to item 12C, Beechwood West 1 Home Association, Inc., Special Service Area Levy of Vote. And Julie Scott will be presenting the results. So, Julie.
Thank you. I'm going to provide just a brief overview at the beginning for anyone present this evening that was not here at our November public meeting. But just a reminder, we have about 12 homes associations in the city of Waterloo created 35 to 45 years ago that have pools. They were created by the developers, and the memberships have been paid annually as required through covenants. And for some, but not all of these associations, those covenants eventually expire. It helps to think of it similar to a condo corporation, although it's not. It was done by covenant. But think of it like a condo corporation. So we have many different residential facilities within the city of Waterloo that have amenities, whether they're pools or additional trail facilities or gymnasiums, basketball courts, tennis courts, etc. And the funding for those facilities is paid for by the residents that enjoy those services. When some of the covenants started to expire, there was a conversation at the city as to a way that we could help these homes associations keep financially viable. And the solution that was presented to council and adopted by council at the time was to implement a special service area levy, which we then later brought to council to entrench as a policy. And essentially what it does is it shifts the collection of those funds and the requirement to pay for the membership to the tax base, and it provides the association with a little bit more certainty year over year with how many members they have and how much income they will have coming in to operate the facilities. So Beechwood West followed the policy and submitted a complete application to launch a special service area levy. The area that we are looking at, if I can get this mouse to work. So just to orient yourselves, this road here cuts off, but is Fisher-Hallman. Herb Street would be down here, Columbia Street up here, and this is Keatsway as it winds through. So Beechwood West 1 is actually a little bit divided by Keatsway, but the facilities themselves are on Sanford Fleming Drive. So as we mentioned, a complete application was submitted that requires a 66 support via petition of the covenanted members to start the process. They can only, the sale can only take effect after the covenants have expired, which for this association is 2020. And we start the vote process, and it requires that we receive 66% of those that vote supporting the sale to bring that back to council. So just a quick overview, we started the vote process September 6th of 2019 with the information packages and the preliminary voters list mailed to all the covenanted properties. The initial ballot period was set to end on December 2nd, 2019, but as I've outlined in the report, we learned that week from Canada Post that there had been an issue with the postal rates applied to the return envelopes. So in order to remedy that, we delivered new ballot packages to all of the homes that we had not received a ballot back from. So with mail-in ballots, you get a declaration form. So you know exactly what addresses have voted. We're then able to identify anyone we hadn't received a package for. And I hand-delivered on December 6th replacement ballot packages to all of those addresses. And we ended voting on January 6th. So a little over a month later than initially intended. We opened ballots on January 7th. And the official results are getting presented to council this evening. So turnout for this vote was almost 87%, which is what we typically see with the special area levy votes. On the question of would you support the institution of a special service area levy, the percentage of the ballots cast, almost 90% of ballots cast voted yes. And if you looked at the eligible properties as a whole, almost 78% of eligible properties voted yes. We did have two ballots that were submitted. One was intentionally spoiled and one it was not clear the intention of the vote. So we do have two, and 21 or almost 10% of ballots cast voting against the implementation. Therefore, having met the 66% threshold of ballots cast, we're bringing this forward to council this evening with a staff recommendation that we enter into a lease and license agreement with Beechwood West 1. What that means from a practical perspective is that the property is leased to the city and we license the operation back to the Homes Association. So annually, the Homes Association will hold an annual general meeting where they set their budget for the year. They provide that information to finance. Finance will then take that. We bring a bylaw forward to council annually that sets what the collection will be on the households year to year. So it is an annual bylaw. The agreement itself does have a term where it can be renewed, but there is an annual check-in with council. And that's all I have this evening, but I'm available for questions either now or throughout. I know that there are a number of delegations speaking.
Thank you, Julie. I'll open it up right now. Are there any questions of Julie? And then I'll open it again for Julie. No? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. We do have 4 registered delegations, and I will remind you that when you come up to the podium, you will have 10 minutes. There's one delegation that has 2 people, so you have 10 minutes combined, and then I will just call you up in order. So our very first delegation is Adi Bias and Heidi Johnson.
Should I just press this button to turn it? Okay, yeah. Okay. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak in front of council on behalf of Beechwood West 1. I'm Heidi Johnson. I'm the secretary of the Beechwood West 1 Homeowners Association. I'm also the chair of the Covenant Expiry Committee. This is Adi Vyas. He is the president of Beechwood West 1. I submitted some notes that also should be included in your package. I'm not going to repeat everything that we talked about at the November 18th meeting. I'm just going to present new information tonight. So as Julie did mention, we did have the final votes for the external ballot, and it was overwhelmingly 90% of the received ballots were in favor of having the special activity levy implemented. These are Covenant households that were polled. These are members that have been belonging to this Covenant Association for 35 plus years. A lot of them are here tonight. So they've been paying it forwards or backwards on whether they use this facility or not, knowing that this does have a sense of community, but also is really tied into the values of their home. So it is very important to them. These votes also represent very closely to the internal petition that was part of our application process. We had about 86% voting yes on that one. We had a bit of higher turnout from the petition because I think it was, we collected it by hand instead of mailing it in. It was a hard process to come to the decision to go to apply for the special activity levy. Beechwood West Covenant Committee did extensive research, exploring lots of different options. We met with the city 2 times. The first time was back in May of 2015 to discuss a special activity levy, and again in December of 2018. So there was lots and lots of discussion and analysis, as I mentioned in my previous presentation last time. And from that extensive research done by numerous volunteers on the board of directors and the Covenant Expired Committee, the decision to pursue the special activity levy was presented to our membership at our annual general meetings 3 times for lots of discussion and communication with them. So again, it was not something that was entered into lightly. All the other options were extensively looked at from a financial, a social, and a longevity standpoint to see how feasible will this be so that this home association could continue to run long into the future. Beechwood West 1 is a private facility. It has no obligation to offer associate annual passes. And some of the home associations do not offer annual associate passes. So it's been a privilege that we have offered to our neighbors in the community over the past couple of years. There's a problem. There was lots of problems when we looked at going to a volunteer or pay-as-you-go model. There's just no stability in that model. Other home associations who have had expired covenants and have defaulted to this model have found that only about 30 to 40% of their covenant members continue to pay on a volunteer basis the annual dues. So that means that annual dues then have to increase because costs never go down. Sometimes that would be a significant increase. If we only got 40% of our covenant members paying, we would have to maybe even double our rates to about $700 to $800 a year. That in turn might make less people want to volunteer to pay. And so it becomes a vicious cycle. Then we'd have to increase the dues more or, try and get more people. And without that good financial stability, the facilities start to deteriorate. Also, the services have to get reduced. The number of hours that we can be open or staffed with our lifeguarding facility. All of these then have negative impacts on the value that is perceived of this home association. Switching from a volunteer pay-as-you-go model to a special service area levy after the fact has been proven to be unsuccessful for other home associations that have tried that way. Beechwood North was the most recent one that tried to go through this and did not get the 66% then in the external vote. So that doesn't give us a lot of hope that that would have been any different outcome for our home association. Selling more associate annual passes is also not a feasible or realistic option for us. Beechwood West 1 facilities does not have a parking lot. So selling more associate memberships and bringing people from other areas up to the city will increase more parking on our side streets. And some of our side streets do not have sidewalks. So cars are parked on both sides of the street, which then becomes a safety issue. Children are often running across the street excited to get to the facilities. Cars cannot visualize them as they're running between cars. Sometimes then they have to walk through a whole street that has no sidewalk. So it's not something that, as a community, that we're really wanting to explore. Associate families also, they do increase the volume of users of the facility. So in turn, that also increases the wages that we have to pay out. So there is a tipping point in terms of how many associates become actually an increased cost in the long term. And again, there's no guarantee that associates would continue to purchase an annual pass season after season after season. What was presented last time is over the last 4 years, we've had 88 different families purchase annual seasonal passes, because on average, an associate family only wants to use our facilities for anywhere from 3 to 6 years. So after it's no longer something that they're interested in, they have no obligation to the facility, so they leave, unlike the covenant members that are continuing to pay whether it's a facility that they use or not use. So Beechwood West 1 is not trying to be exclusive. We've been looking into ways that we can really continue to have our friends and neighbors enjoy the facilities with us. We already have great guest policies. At Beechwood West 1, a member can bring up to 6 members with them to use the facilities. We also invite non-members into our social events. We have a pizza party, an opening barbecue, we have movie nights, we also have an adult social, so there's still opportunities that we would like to engage the greater community as well. Also, Beechwood West 1 hosts events at McRae Park, which it's adjacent to. For the last 35 years, we've been taking care of the outdoor rink. Actually, Barry Taylor here, for 35 years, he was spoken about in the Chronicle that he's been doing that volunteer, and that's open for all residents. Yeah, fantastic. We also do the annual May Earth Day cleanup at the park as well. So there's lots of opportunities still that we're trying to engage the whole community. We understand that home associations are something that are unique to only a few neighborhoods in Waterloo, but we really think it would be wonderful that with a little partnership with the City of Waterloo, that we could continue to operate our home association as we have been doing for the past 4 years. We ask that you respect the 2 votes that were done by this community, where the vast majority of us want to implement the special activity service levy. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Heidi and Adi, there are a couple minutes left. Did you want to say anything before I open it to
I'm
questions?
just here mostly for the questions. If there are any questions, any comments,
questions
concerns.
from council?
So Heidi was leading this effort for the last couple of years, and before that, some other board members. So.
Okay, great. Councillor Vasek?
Thanks through you, Councillor Hanmer. You mentioned you can have 6 members at a time, and I was curious if there was a limit to how often you can bring these 6 members.
6 guests.
6 guests at any one given time?
Yeah, so other than our swimming lessons, which pretty much run Monday through Friday in the morning times, it's open swim from 1 till 8 or 9, whenever the closing time is, depending on the day of the week, and on the weekends. So no, there's no limit,
There's
really.
no limit.
Like you can bring the same 6 guests over and over. You can bring guests as much as you want all year. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Great, thank you for both of you to all the work that you have done on getting us to this point today, and I appreciate your presentation this evening. We do have, the next delegation is Jennifer Eagle. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Jennifer Eagle, and I'm a resident of Beechwood West 1 area. My husband and I moved to the area with our 3 children about 12 years ago, and although our family rarely uses the facility now because our youngest child is 15, we did spend many hours using the facility when the children were small. They took their swimming lessons there, they played a little bit of tennis, but mainly they spent time with their community, splashing around in the pool with their friends and family. My husband and I made friends there. We were welcomed into the community coming from Milton or from Toronto before that. It was a great way to build some new relationships here. I wanted to speak tonight in part to publicly thank our board for the work that they did to help make this decision as a community. This was so much work. As was explained at the last meeting, they consulted other pools, held neighborhood meetings, walked door to door to answer questions, updated websites, they just went above and beyond. I followed along as best I could at all of these steps and felt that their assessments were well researched and easy to understand and very accessible. So I wanted to make sure you knew we did know what was going on. After much research and reflection, I support the SAL because I believe that it's going to be the most sustainable way to maintain the pool and the tennis facility. I think my husband and I are at an interesting life stage to be making this decision. As I just admitted, we don't even really use the pool anymore. That would have seemed impossible to me 5 years ago when the children were there literally all the time. But now they're more likely to be the lifeguards than the swimmers. They're working, they're not living with us in the community. We're also at a crazy expensive stage in our life with 2 at university and 1 about to head off. And although we would like to say that we would still pay with the volunteer model, as we would like that idea that we would, we're not sure. When we had a good, frank discussion about it, we said we probably would at the beginning because right now we're passionate about this working, but we are honest with ourselves. Life would bring other priorities and probably we would slowly stop paying. Why then am I supporting the SAL that would make me keep paying? I actually think that the SAL ends up being the option that is not only the most sustainable for the pool, which I do really like the pool, but that it's also the most inclusive in this really strange way. And that may surprise people, so I'm going to explain it a little bit. With the SAL, all of the families in the original Beechwood West 1 area will still be able to come to the facility. This is easy to explain to children. I'm a teacher in the neighborhood. I teach privately, and so I always think of things as how would I explain it to kids? That's just me. I can tell them there's an old rule that I don't like that says we can only have certain people be members of that pool, and that's because the pool belongs to them. That was agreed a long time ago. Can't change the rule, but they can come as guests with friends, and we will try and make that possible. We'll look into anything we can come up with that we're allowed to do to make it work for them. With the volunteer model, on the other hand, or pay as you go or whatever, however you want to call it, some of the families in our area will pick to become members and others will not. One would have to explain to children that they cannot use the facility because this time their parents either can't or won't pay. I feel like that is more confusing. Furthermore, I can easily see the fees increasing as we become dependent on less families for the same funding. That may be prohibitive to some in our community. Instead, it will mean, perhaps, that families with the extra money or that do have the ability will drive to our pool and in a yuck scenario, park in front of a house with children in it whose parents did not pay and get out and run to the pool facility. I just feel like that is harder to explain and definitely not more inclusive. I've also found myself wondering what discord might be created between neighbors when everyone suddenly knows who is paying and who is not. If the pool is struggling, will we be tempted to resort to pressuring each other to join? Will we judge those who do not pay? I don't think that's going to be positive in our community either. I want to acknowledge that this is not an easy decision for me or for most people in our area, and that we've talked about it a lot. Many of us, or I would guess most of us would be sad to lose our associate members. They add a youth and vibrancy to the pool community. You go there and it's full. It's been wonderful. I also teach, as I said, in our neighborhood, and I know some of the little ones that will no longer be able to come and join in the fun. In an ideal world, Waterloo would have more of these community hubs that we've been so blessed to enjoy, and every child would have access to something like this. We wanted the pool to stay as it was, but unfortunately we don't get to vote on that or on making this a more inclusive place that we could reach out to different communities. On a final note, I'm hoping that the council respects the vote of our community and passes the SAL. I also hope that you're able to walk away feeling good about your decision. I've lived in the area long enough to know that our children benefit from the services provided by the facility. And actually we do too. Yes, some of the families in our community have a higher socioeconomic status than others. That does not mean that our kids do not deal with divorce, bullying, mental health issues, physical limitations, and all the normal stuff that makes navigating childhood messy and tricky. It's wonderful that the city has a chance to help this little pool and tennis facility keep building the community and touching the lives that it's able to reach out to. We thank you in advance for helping make that possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Just hold on for a second to see if there are any questions. Any questions for Jennifer? Oh, I am reminded in my remiss, unfortunately, we do not allow applause in council chambers. So as enthusiastic and excited that you are, I should have mentioned that at the beginning, but thank you. Are there any questions for Jennifer? Seeing none, Jennifer, thank you again.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is Sharif Mohammed. Sharif, please come to the podium.
Chair and Council, I appreciate you guys letting me speak in front of you today. I'm speaking on behalf of the associates, and I guess I'm going to try and keep it brief. I spoke in the November meeting. A couple points that I'll bring up that were established in that November meeting. One is that the SAL is meant to be a last resort for home associations. So I appreciate that it does provide a guaranteed revenue stream going forward, but it's actually designed to be a last resort when a pool is not viable as we stand today. Also, the SAL can be applied for any time after the covenant expiration. So, if it's economically viable today voluntarily, it can be applied for in a number of years if the circumstances change. And then obviously, based on the vote, we have 190 households within the home association that have voted yes for the SAL. I think ultimately what this is coming down to is what's the financial viability of this pool with or without the SAL. I know the board has had a different assumption that I had presented in the financial analysis I provided in November, where I'd assumed 67% of home associates would pay voluntarily. The board has used 40%, as you saw in the presentation there. 190 people voted yes. By essence, that's basically 190 people saying they're willing to pay voluntarily for the pool. Now, granted, there could be some that decide differently as a result of a SAL not going through, but really we have to ask ourselves the question, if the SAL did not go through, is that 190 people, 190 households that voted yes, is that suddenly going to reduce to 98, which is the number used in the board's financial viability? The reality is that's highly unlikely. The pool is viable today, and I think the strong vote for yes actually further demonstrates that. So I think by voting for the SAL today, really what we're doing is it's a trade-off. We're trading off the ease of cash collections and membership collections, which I understand are not easy and very time-consuming, but it's at the sacrifice of excluding 50 families from the pool, as well as forcing the 20 families that voted no to pay against their will. So that seems like a very heavy trade-off to me, especially when it's actually not even necessary. One of the last points I'll make here is, making it a voluntary pay model does keep it inclusive. It means everybody can join wherever you live, not just a restricted area around the map. So I think it does promote inclusiveness much more than with a SAL in place. And then lastly, if a SAL was put in place and the associate members could not use the pool, there is a waiting list at Upper Beechwood 1 and Upper Beechwood 2 pools, which are the closest neighboring pools. So those 50 associates would now be filtering into those 2 pools, creating more congestion there and actually adding to the demand and the wait list. So it's not as simple as kind of the associates saying, hey, let's go use a different pool. Those are all filled up too, and the demand in the entire Beechwood area is that high that there's actually wait lists on every single one of these pools. So I guess my ask of council today is to look at what makes sense versus what the policy says or what's, the votes that came in. At the end of the day, this pool is viable. There's strong demand within the community. And I think if that changes at some point in time, I think every associate member would be happy to support the SAL if we actually felt that the pool would not be viable. None of us want this pool to struggle. None of us want this pool to get run down or go under. I would rather not use the pool with my family and have others enjoy it if that was the case, but I just don't believe that's the case today, especially with 190 households voting yes, meaning they're voluntarily willing to pay for this pool.
Okay, thank you, Sharif. Are there any questions for the delegate? Seeing none, Sharif, thank you again very much for your presentation. And our final delegation is Matthew Smith. Matthew, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm here with my wife, Beth. We live in the area covered by the covenant with our three children. We've lived there for about 10 years, and prior to that, we lived in Westvale. Many of the themes that I want to speak about are similar to what Jen had to say. I won't say it nearly as eloquently as she did, but I'll just share a little bit of our story. When we began to outgrow our home in Westvale, we were looking to move. We really only considered Beechwood, and the reason was very simple, and that was because of the pool. We'd had the good fortune to visit the pool several times with friends, and immediately appreciated the benefit of that to our family and the enjoyment of our family. But we also thought beyond that, and we recognized the value that having access to the pool would have to our investment in our new home. So we actually bought an older home, at least older in terms of Beechwood, that required a considerable amount of maintenance and upgrades. But this was a very conscious choice. We prioritized location over the home itself because it was important to us that we had those access to those facilities on an ongoing basis. You know, we could have chosen to buy a newer home that required less attention, but wasn't in the area covered by the covenant, and we made the choice that we did because of priorities that we had at that time. I do want to emphasize as well that none of the current homeowners have chosen for the covenant to expire. This was a decision made by the developers more than 30 years ago. So we're going through this process by necessity, not by choice. It's not something that I think any of us relish. Nevertheless, the board has done a great deal of research over many years, as Heidi indicated earlier, and I feel that the homeowners were really well informed throughout the process, and that everyone was able to make a really well-informed decision when it was time for both votes. So there's really a clear majority here that have voted in favor of the SAL, and I would ask council to respect the wishes of the homeowners. Thank you.
Matthew, thank you. Just hold on for a second to see if there are any questions. Any questions for this delegate? Seeing none, thank you again for your thoughts. So we do have recommendations before us, and I guess I will. A question for staff? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Vasic.
Thanks through you, Councillor Hanmer. I feel like I have a really good sense of what will happen if council votes yes, but I'm less clear on what practically happens if council voted no. Could you help me understand that a little bit better?
Through Chair Hanmer to Councillor Vasic. It's not really something that staff can speak of. That would have to be a decision of the association. So there's a variety of options the association could consider. One of them they've talked about is the volunteer pay-as-you-go. They could look at the facilities as a whole. I mean, if it becomes financially no longer viable, then they could look at potentially filling in the pool, tearing up tennis courts, potentially selling off the land as a building lot. It's not city-owned land. It's privately owned by the corporation. There'd be some legal considerations around that. The association was formed to deliver recreation facilities to the covenanted properties. So there'd be a number of things I think the association would have to look into. But the city would not necessarily be involved in any of those discussions because it is privately owned land by a corporation.
Okay. Any further questions for staff? Then Mayor Jaworski, can I look to you to make the motion? A seconder, please. Councillor Henry. Any further discussion? I'll go ahead. With a comment? Go ahead.
I think, certainly I belong to a home association, so I'm very familiar with this, and through being elected to this council, seeing what other home associations have gone through. And at the end of the day, there's a single list of all the addresses for which forevermore this property is the responsibility of, and that's of the people who voted here tonight. And it's sort of unfortunate that these were set with covenants that expire, and it's sort of unfortunate they were set to a certain group, but that's the cards that were dealt here today. We have a policy that I think certainly the group has followed and gone through all the work for it, Heidi and Adi and all the rest of the volunteers there, and trying to make the best of an unfortunate situation, really, when it comes down to it, because I do know that, as one of the delegates mentioned here tonight, it's something that's very popular when you have young kids. Once your kids are older, like mine, you end up playing tennis once a year, it seems, but it's still a vital part of your community, and this helps ensure that it has a way forward and doesn't fall into disrepair or whatever might happen with it. So that's why I'm moving it here today.
Okay. Councillor Henry, any comments? I will call the question. And all those in favor? Any abstaining? That's all of us abstaining? No, sorry. All those opposed? Thank you. So that is the motion that is carried. The recommendations are carried. I'd like to just add a comment, and I didn't make them as the motion. I know that this was a very difficult process for both those that are part of the covenant properties and also the surrounding properties. And as your councillor, I want to commend all of you for the comments and the thoughtfulness that you went through and looking at what are some of the alternatives, what are the possibilities. And I do hope through this process and working through some of our other neighborhood strategies that we are able to rebuild and continue to have the Beechwood West 1 neighborhood and surrounding areas a very viable place for us to be. So again, thank you for the work that all of you have done in carrying this to this stage at this point. All right, we will move on to my second one. I'll give it a minute maybe while while people move out. Dominique's in position, okay. Yes, I have you on my list. As long as I don't skip over it. I just about skipped over it. All right. Give them just another second. I know. All right, the next item on our agenda is a recommendation to amend the designation bylaw 8262 for 25 Regina Street South, the Button Factory, under the Ontario Heritage Act. There isn't a presentation, but we do have a staff ready if there are any questions that we have. Any questions for staff? Councillor Bonigar.
Through you, Councillor Hanmer, I'll speak up a little. I just want to thank staff for all the work that you put in right across the city, but especially with our heritage buildings in the core. I just was curious, like Button Factory Arts has been in that location for a considerable amount of time. Were they consulted as part of this, and what was their assessment of the proposed heritage list?
Through you, Chair Hanmer. So both the manager of arts and culture, Estero, as well as the executive director of the Button Factory were notified of the report and the proposed amendment to the designation bylaw. So they were informed of the proposed changes. We did not receive any opposition or further comments on it.
When were they made? Sorry, I've got a cold, so my brain is running slow. So when were they alerted to the report?
Staff were drafting the report in December, so it probably would have been in the beginning of December, if I recall.
So this wouldn't have had time to go to the board of Button Factory Arts for consideration at all?
I received no indication that it did, no.
It wouldn't have. I'm on the board and we haven't had meetings yet over that period. Would you normally, just given that a long-term tenant would be intimately understanding of the space, I was just curious as to what their input would be. Would it be of value to this process to have input from them, or is it just completely unrelated to people who actually use the building?
No, I think there's certainly a stakeholder in this process. I think the intent of amending the designation bylaw is to better describe and list the heritage attributes of the building. This whole process was initiated through facilities as part of a potential elevator addition. And so that's sort of a separate sort of next step that I think the Button Factory and the arts community would be much more inclined to be involved in the actual planning and construction phase of a future elevator addition. The intent of this report is to amend the designation bylaw to better inform that elevator addition.
Awesome, because it's really, I'm just motivated by I want to make sure that while we are protecting a wonderful building, we're not precluding any modernization or, not kind of infringing on the utility of the space. So it sounds like this is all melding together beautifully. I do have one other question. What is a heritage sprinkler alarm? I'm just really curious.
Refresh my memory here. So, through you, Chair Hanmer, the sprinkler alarm. I was informed from our chair of the Heritage Committee that it was a feature that was a part of the Button Factory. It's representative of the sort of industrial buildings of the time. There's an additional Button Factory in the city of Kitchener that also has this type of sprinkler alarm, and it is a part of the designation bylaw as a heritage attribute.
Thank you.
Any further questions of staff? And I know it's a little hard to hear right at the moment. Yeah. Okay. So do I have a motion, someone to move? Jen is very excited. Councillor Vasek is very excited to move, and seconding it, Councillor Bonagar. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That's all of us. It is carried. Thank you very much. Our next item is the proposed demolition of residential dwellings 28 Dorset Street and 7 Princess Street West. We do not have a presentation in particular, but Dominic Simpson, thank you, Dominic, is here if there are any questions. Councillor Veith, Councillor Bonagar.
Through you, Chair Hamner, thank you. I just want to, could you just remind us, these houses were going to be demolished anyway, correct?
Through you, Chair Hanmer, yes, they would be demolished either way. It's just because of the hydro infrastructure that needs to be put in place on site. The applicant is asked to demolish the houses in advance of site plan approval. They currently have a site plan application under review with the city, though.
Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Barnagar, sorry.
Thank you, Chair Hanmer. I just for context, I'm getting a little bit concerned about the number of demolition exemptions that are coming to council in general. So I know in theory that granting this early would then start the clock. So the project would then need to be done in 2 years' time. But if a project is delayed, I'm wondering at times maybe the fine would be worth paying for a developer. So I'm loath to make it look like if you apply to demolish a house early, that just means everyone can demolish a house early. So I'm just curious, what's the minimum kind of demolition required to actually do the hydro work they're talking about? Would demolishing one house do it? Because it seems to be an ease of access issue that's prompting this. So what can we do to ease the access without keeping the precedent rolling? I see Mr. Cotter coming to the stage.
Through your chair, Hamner. It's a good question. I think as the city intensifies, the demolition applications that we're seeing are evolving, and that's why you're seeing requests to advance certain demolition applications before the traditional rules that were set in 1986 are abided by. In this case, we evaluate and typically only advance applications where we believe there's a public interest. In this case, it's an interest to advance hydro infrastructure that will serve multiple properties, contribute to multiple developments in this area, all of which that have seen council consideration through a zoning process. So from our perspective, these applications have come to council, this application through a full zoning application, the other application through Lexington Park, which is the expansion of the historic post office site. Again, that site will be serviced by these hydro facilities. So in our mind, we are pretty careful with the demolition control bylaw, but where we do see, one, a public interest, and two, the applications have been vetted through council, then we're prepared to advance reports to council for consideration. Ultimately, it's council's call as to whether you want to allow the demolition to proceed in advance of site plan approval. In this case, the one thing that we did want to make council aware of, that the application that was advanced through the zoning process, the building elevations have slightly been modified as outlined in Dominic's report. So we're just making council aware of that. But as Mr. Simpson indicated, the applications are in site plan. They are being reviewed by staff. This is just an effort to try and move things concurrently to benefit multiple properties.
Okay, so in general, can you give me an idea of like the time buffer that's essentially, is it a couple of months early, a couple of weeks early, or is it impossible to tell right now?
Through you, Chair Hamner, very difficult to tell with site planning. Again, a lot of it is an iterative process. We do our work, we put it back to the applicant, and there's a lot of pieces that need to come together. But I can say that we're committed to moving it forward as quickly as we can at our end. I'm sure the applicant's doing the same at their end.
And in your opinion, are both buildings in the way of the hydro work that needs to be done?
Through your Chair Hamner, effectively, in order to secure some of the design components related to the hydro, you've got to obstruct the driveway. So you need to work on the demolition of the one property, absolutely, but that typically has an effect of impacting the adjacent structure as well. So given the efficiencies of taking both structures down at one time, it likely makes sense to issue the demolition permits now, allow for that site to stabilize, access into the site during the hydro servicing. And again, as we understand from discussions with the proponent, they're looking to advance their proposal as quickly as they can.
Okay, so potentially by just limiting this to one house, we could be making the second house even more unsafe for the public.
Potentially.
Thank you.
Any further questions of staff? No? Can I have someone put the motion on the floor? Councillor Veith, second. Councillor Bonagar. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That is all of us, so it's carried. Thank you very much. Our next item is the request to amend Section 37 Planning Act, 145 Columbia Street West. Again, there is no presentation, but Laura Dewar is here if there are any questions. Are there any questions of staff? Good. If not, could I have, go ahead, Councillor Freeman.
Sorry, I did have one question. I didn't see an uplift listed for this Section 37. Did I miss it?
Through you, Chair Hanmer, it's basically what we did in this case was we just took the last value that was used for the last density bonusing application that was brought forward and approved by council. Not sure, I think it was a Hickory Street file that Rita Zelok brought forward. So that was the value that we used in this case.
Go ahead.
And was there community benefit identified for that piece? I just didn't see it. Was it in the agreement later on?
So it's sort of left over from there in the zoning bylaw that was approved back in, I think, 2013 for 330 Phillip Street and 145 Columbia Street. There was a sort of density bonusing package that was approved. It was put in the zoning bylaw at that time. So through this process, we aren't negotiating new benefits. We're basically just proposing an increase to the security that the city would take for the lead building, and the developer would give us that security, and they would be refunded the security when they perform on the lead building.
Councillor Bonagar.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Hanmer. I just had one question. So this is for 21 additional bedrooms. What's the mix of apartments in the building, like one bed versus two bed, and how would this affect that balance?
Through you, Chair Hanmer, I am not quite sure exactly the mix. At this point, they could all be one bedrooms. They could be a combination. where I can't actually speak to that exactly, and I don't have the site plan that has been brought forward most recently in front of me. I think it's a combination of 2 and 3 bedroom units.
Apologies, I should have let you know
Sorry.
that I had this in the back of my mind. But thank you.
Any further questions? May I have a mover, Councillor Henry, seconder, Mayor Jaworski? All those in favor? Carried, that's all of us. Thank you very much, and thank you, Laura. That brings us to item 13A, which is, the next item on the agenda is 13A. A correction's been made to the title as it's listed on the agenda. It currently reads Zone Change Application Z1907 and Official Plan Amendment number 26. It should be Official Plan Amendment number 28. This is an informal public meeting to consider zone change application Z1907 and official plan amendment number 28, Marzio Architects, 693 Beechwood Drive. There will be no decision made tonight. This is the first time that council is hearing the presentation. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future date. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anybody who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaws, should sign the appropriate registry located at the desk at the rear of the council chambers. If there's more than one registry, please make sure that you are signing the appropriate one. Laura Dewar will now provide a brief overview of the application. Laura, go ahead.
Good evening, Chair. Is that on? Good evening, Chair Hanmer, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, and the public here tonight for this informal public meeting. The application for Official Plan Amendment 28 and Zoning Bylaw Amendment Z1907 was submitted by Marzio Inc. Architects on behalf of Beechwood Cooperative Homes, Inc. for the lands at 693 Beechwood Drive. So the subject property, no click activated. The subject property is about 5.3 acres in size. It contains 78 rental townhouse units, and it's operated as a co-op within the region's housing portfolio. 61 of the units are subsidized rent geared to income units, and the other 17 are market rate units. So this little community was built in about 1994. And this aerial view gives the property some broader context. We have singles to the east here. We have the hydro corridor and additional singles to the north. To the west is Herbsville Road and Clare Hills Natural Area. And there's a few singles in this location, and the rest of the lands to the south are generally undeveloped lands. This is the site plan that was approved back in 1993 for this development. 14 of the townhouses front directly onto Beechwood Drive, you can see here, and the rest are internal to the site. These units there's units along the back of the site here that are also 3 stories, and the rest of the units are all 2 stories and facing into an internal private road. All of the townhouses have a garage and space in their driveway for another vehicle. There's also about 30 visitor parking spaces on the site. The development has a community center, a playground, and a common recreational area in this location, which also functions as like a drainage area currently. The main entrance to the site is from Beechwood Drive, and there's also a secondary emergency access and pedestrian access to Herbsville Court. This is a street view along Beechwood Drive of the property. These are some internal views of the community center. You can see here the existing playground. And this is sort of the central recreation area, drainage area where the proposed building is to be located. These photos show the internal driveway and some of the two-story townhouses on the site. And this is just another view on the other side of that common recreational open space area. So Beechwood Cooperative is proposing to build an apartment building here in this location in the center of the site. The building would be 5 stories in height, 16 meters in height. It would contain 32 units, all 1 bedroom. They would add about 42 surface parking spaces to the site. The community center and the playground would remain intact, and some of the existing underground services would likely need to be upgraded. I believe water and sanitary. Overall, the development would have 110 units, 242 bedrooms, and 168 parking spaces. These are some conceptual elevations of the apartment building that were prepared by the agent, Masri Architects. You can see the community center right here when you enter the site. So this is kind of looking into the site from Beechwood Drive. And here's the apartment building. I'll let Rima Masri, the architect, speak in more detail to the proposed building. Here's just an alternative view. You can see the community center in this location and some of the 2-story townhouses that would be next to the apartment building. So the property is designated low-density residential in the city's official plan. This designation permits a range of low-rise building forms with a maximum height of 10 meters. Apartments may be permitted subject to a zoning bylaw amendment and up to a maximum height of 12 meters. So as you can see in this image below, the orange and blue lands that you see here along Herb Street are lands within an odor corridor, which is where our official plan directs growth and intensification. These lands are not within an odor corridor. They're currently zoned residential 8, which allows towns, stacked towns, and triplexes. So the applicant is proposing to add a specific provision area in the official plan, and the purpose of this would be to allow the proposed apartment building to be 16 meters in height, where the official plan currently caps apartments where they're determined to be an appropriate use to be 12 meters. The applicant is also requesting to change the zoning category from residential 8 to residential 9 to add apartments as the permitted use. That's the main difference between the two zones. They wish to increase the maximum height of an apartment from 12 meters to 16 meters. They need some relief from the bylaw to allow the building entrances to be on the east and west facades versus the facade facing Beechwood. They need to legalize some interior setbacks and the driveway width. They're requesting a reduction of 3 spaces for the visitor parking for the towns, but they may be able to rearrange the parking and meet the parking. And they're requesting relief from the loading space requirement where 1 is required and none would be provided. So any request for an apartment building in the low-density residential designation is required to meet a range of criteria in the official plan related to density, site and building design, infrastructure, and neighborhood compatibility. Staff see this proposal as meeting those criteria. The request also has to be reviewed against certain locational criteria. And in this case, staff believe it doesn't meet all of those criteria. So it's not in an odor corridor, it doesn't have direct access to a collector or arterial road, and it's not adjacent to a school, but it is arguably on the edge of a low-density residential neighborhood. It's a close walk to bus stops, to a school, to a park. In addition, the proposed building is situated internal to the site. They are trying to meet the parking requirements, and they do intend to accommodate new affordable housing units within the building. But as for the proposal to go above the 12-meter height cap in the official plan to 16 meters for a 5-story apartment building, staff does have concerns. In 2012, the city did create, through the official plan, the most recent official plan, 4 distinct height and density categories. Apartments were taken out at that time of the low density category. They could be brought back in subject to a process such as this, with a clear height cap of 12 meters. This application does propose an even taller built form to a more intensive building type in our lowest height and density category. We need to consider the cascading effect this sort of request can have in other low-density residential areas across the city. Our official plan directs that increases in height be considered typically through our bonusing policies, where the city can secure community benefits in exchange for additional height. But those sorts of applications are only in our city. Our official plan only directs bonusing to take place in nodes and corridors, and this is not in a node or corridor. We also question the built form compatibility here. We have 3-story towns at the front and back of the site, 8.8 meters in height, and we have 2-story, 6.4 meter towns elsewhere on the site. So this would be directly next to a 16-meter, 5-story building. We also wonder about the visual impact. You would certainly see a building like this from around the neighborhood, where previously there really wasn't this sort of building sort of protruding up from the skyline. It can dramatically change, we think, the feel of a low-rise neighborhood. In terms of the zoning review, we're generally supportive of the request to rezone the lands from R8 to R9 to allow an apartment building on the site. It would be subject to a few things like confirming there's sufficient pressure for fire. We do think they should be meeting the parking and loading requirements. And we want to make sure there's no legal issues with adding a new building to an existing co-op. And of course, if we receive any other compelling feedback from the public or council, we want to consider that as well. As I said, staff do have significant concerns regarding the proposed height of 5 stories and 16 meters. The applicant has expressed a clear intent for this building to accommodate affordable units. Affordable housing and low to moderate income households are both specifically defined in the provincial policy statement. And we know there is a really strong need for this type of housing in our community. But we have an implementation challenge here. We don't have a mechanism through this process to secure this project as affordable housing, and I just want to make council aware of that. However, staff do want to work with the applicant and any partners to move this affordable housing project forward. The next steps are for the city to receive some final comments from the region, provide comments back to the applicant. If there are any changes to the application, it would be recirculated. And then ultimately, we would come back to council with a staff report and recommendations at a formal public meeting for council to make a decision. And I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Do any councillors have questions for Laura? Just remembering that this is an informal public meeting and only questions of clarification may be asked. Council members should not express opinions at this point. Questions of clarification. Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through to Laura. When you first started this presentation, you mentioned that this was sort of a drainage area, yet this is where they want to put a building. That's not an issue?
Through you, Chair Hanmer, I understand that the storm pipe that was installed back in 1994 was oversized, possibly they were considering that this might happen in the future. So our engineering staff has taken a look at that, and it is possible because of that oversized drainage pipe to infill this area and still have sufficient drainage off the site for stormwater.
Okay, thank you. You also mentioned 42 additional surface parking spots, but it wasn't really obvious to me where more surface parking would go. Is that a better question for the next delegate?
That might be a question they could show you where specifically they've accommodated them. Yeah.
And then finally, one of the things on slide 14 you had is it's not adjacent to a node or corridor, but if we think about our nodes and corridor study, it was before Ironedale, Herbsville had its prominence that it does today. But I think the fact that notwithstanding that, the building still is oriented towards Beechwood Drive, not Herbsville Road, the major corridor, and so therefore that's still an issue. I'm just thinking back, we did the nodes and corridor study so long ago that it wouldn't have studied that road because it was sort of back road back then.
Commissioner
I'm
Rock?
looking at more vintage staff on this one.
Certainly, it does not meet the criteria established. We do have criteria as to what is a minor collector, what is a collector, what is a node, what is a minor node. It does not meet that criteria today, nor did it in the past.
Thank you.
Councillor Vasek and then Councillor Bonigar.
Thanks through you, Councillor Hanmer. I just might not understand this fully from the drawings. I'm curious how a project like this comes to be. So it looks like all the townhomes are staying intact. No affordable housing is lost. And in fact, there's interest in actually increasing affordable housing. So I'm just curious how this partnership came to be. And I think that's my main question. Thank you.
Through you, Chair Hanmer, it's a great question, and I think that Rima Masri would be more equipped to answer that question.
Councillor Bonigar, Councillor Bradley.
Through you, Chair Hanmer. Well, thank you, Mayor. You asked my first question. And the other question I had, is the intent for this building to be entirely affordable? Has that been established yet?
Through you, Chair Hanmer, I don't believe it's been established, but again, Rima might be able to update you a little bit on what they're hoping to achieve.
Okay. Councillor Bodley.
Through you, Chair Hammer, I'm just wondering if you can speak. I'm a little confused, I guess, or maybe you could speak to why we have this implementation challenge with ensuring that it's affordable housing going forward. Is it that we don't have this tool within the Municipal Act? Is there something that we could do at council that could alleviate that implementation challenge? Or I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
I think the type of thing we would maybe want to see would be an agreement of some sort, but as far as I'm aware, we don't have a tool through the Planning Act or official plan to give us the legal authority to require or enter into such an agreement, but maybe Joel can speak to it a little bit further.
I see Mr. Cotter has information.
Through you, Chair Hamner, to Councillor Bodley. The simple answer is the Planning Act allows us to regulate the type of land use and the type of building that's constructed on the property, not how the property is operated. So again, in certain instances where we do have authority, like Section 37 for bonusing criteria, maybe we will give you extra height, extra density in lieu of a community benefit, which in theory could be affordable housing. And that section of the Planning Act gives us specific authority to enter into agreements. So the challenge we have is as Ms. Dewar indicates, an issue of law. We don't have the legal authority to require the building to be used for affordable housing. Council, and I think that's what Ms. Dewar's trying to imply to council, is council has the authority to permit an apartment building on the property. How it's actually operated, we don't necessarily have the ability. But we have the submission of the applicant, which is they intend to advance it for affordable housing.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Bottom.
Sorry, just to follow up. Knowing that they're going through the process with the region, are we likely to know before the formal public meeting whether they've actually entered into those agreements with the region for the subsidies that they're looking for? And if so, do those regional subsidies have time limits attached to them as to how long they have to operate it?
Through you, Chair Hanmer, my understanding is that that process would probably take longer than it will be for us to come back to council with a staff report and a recommendation.
Okay, Councillor Freeman.
Through Chair Hanmer, Mr. Cotter, haven't we demonstrated trust with other folks that have told us they were going to build affordable housing in the past, like the Maxwells or the Alfred Henschen Co-op? So because there's always that chicken and egg piece, right, where you have to apply for funding so you can enter into an affordable housing agreement, but to apply for funding you have to have a shovel-ready project.
Through you, Chair Hamner, to Councillor Freeman, absolutely. The challenge is always that in order to advance some of these requests for funding, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have the land use permissions to advance such projects. So, and again, most of these projects that we see are advanced in good faith, which I have full belief this is what's going on before council. We have an intent to advance a project for affordable housing. I think staff are just trying to be diligent to advise council that there are certain limitations in law. That notwithstanding, the request before you is it appropriate to add additional intensification of this site with the intention of the applicant to advance affordable housing? So I think that's all in good faith.
Further question, Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Hanmer, and to the point made, or the question asked by Councillor Vasic earlier, would it be fair to say that within the city's height and density bonusing program, that there was some hope that there might be folks that have land that could potentially intensify to create affordable housing, and that's why it's part of our bonusing opportunities?
I think through your chair, Hanmer, it's really that one policy that speaks to the lands having to be within a node or corridor that somewhat limits us here. I mean, I think it's possible. Joel, speak to that.
Through you, Chair Hamner. I think the official plan was structured in such a way that it made it easier to advance these types of applications within nodes and corridors. Those areas were identified where growth and intensification was intended. And so allowing bonusing frameworks from a policy perspective tied to nodes and corridors makes the implementation a lot easier to adjust height and density. For these other sites, it's just a little bit more of a planning process. You have to establish a specific provision area and then establish specific official plan policies tied to advancing these types of applications. So the way I would characterize it is because it's outside of a node and corridor, there's a greater care that's taken from a planning perspective to make sure that the level of intensification we're doing here is appropriate and doesn't, as Ms. Dewar indicated, have this cascading effect in other low-density residential areas. So part of the consideration is if we approve development here, why is it appropriate here on this particular location, and what are the implications from a precedent perspective in other locations? It's not to say that it can't be done, it's just there's a little more care that's required through the planning process. And that's the application that the proponents are advancing for council.
Any further questions for staff? Okay, thank you very much. I will now ask any registered delegations to come forward. I will call you by name because we do have 3 registered delegations for this evening. When you come forward, could you please state your name and municipality of residence for the record? And I'll call first Rima Masri and Jennifer Voss.
Good evening, Council. My name is Jennifer Voss. I'm with JV Planning and Development Consulting, and I live in the city of Cambridge. Thank you. And I'm here tonight with Rima Masri, who is the architect for the project, and several members, residents of the Beechwood Co-op. So I'm a planner, so I'm just going to go through kind of like the planning rationale for our proposal. Laura has touched on a lot of the points that I have included in my presentation, so I'll go over those quickly. Which will hopefully free up some more time for Rima to discuss the architectural component of the project. So the existing development consists of 78 townhouse units with 210 bedrooms. As Laura had said, 61 of the 78 units are geared to income subsidized housing. There's 107 existing parking spaces, and which include 29 surface and 78 within the townhouse garages. There's a community center building and the children's playground, which are proposed to remain intact in their current form. How do I just tap? So What we are proposing is we're proposing a 32 one-bedroom unit apartment building on 4 floors with a very unique feature on this building which increases the building height. We're proposing a greenhouse amenity area which includes a communal kitchen and dining area and rooftop terrace on the 5th floor of the building. So a total of 242 bedrooms are proposed. The proposed development results in a density of 112 bedrooms per hectare, which is well below the maximum density of 150 bedrooms per hectare, which is the maximum permitted density on this site. So we're not proposing to increase the density of the site through our OPA ZBA application. We're proposing to increase the height from 12 meters to 16 meters to accommodate the 5th floor, which does not contain any units. It contains a greenhouse and very unique amenity area for the residents of the co-op. A total of 149 parking spaces are proposed, which would include 71 surface parking spaces. 29 are currently existing, and we're adding 42 new parking spaces, predominantly through, if you look on the site plan, around the actual apartment building. We're adding additional parking spaces. We've squeezed some into the corners of the site where we could, but we are not proposing any parking variances. We initially, in our original application, we were proposing a site-specific regulation for relief of 3 visitor parking spaces, but we have accommodated those 3 additional parking spaces on site. So we are not proposing any parking variances or special regulations with respect to parking. So a total of 145 spaces are required. We're proposing a total of 149 parking spaces, which includes 30 visitor parking and 6 barrier-free parking spaces as per the zoning bylaw. These subject lands were originally zoned medium density 3 in the former zoning bylaw 1418, which, as you are aware, was recently in effect until, I believe, end of September. The MD3 zone did permit townhouses and apartment buildings. Under the former zoning bylaw, the primary reason that we were requesting a zoning amendment was to allow for a maximum building height of 16 meters, whereas the MD3 zone permitted 13.5 meters. So we were requesting an increase of 2.5 meters in height. And we also required a number of site-specific zoning regulations to address reduction in parking, landscaped open space, density, but these were based on outdated regulations that do not align with current planning policy. So now that the old bylaw is no longer in effect, that part of the application is essentially not required. The subject lands under the new zoning bylaw are zoned R8, and unlike the previous MD3 zone, apartment buildings are not permitted in the R8 zone. So under the new zoning bylaw, a zoning amendment application is required to permit the proposed apartment building and to permit a maximum building height of 16 meters, whereas 12 meters is permitted. Site-specific regulations are required to recognize existing conditions, including the width of the existing driveway at the property line and the requirement for a type A loading space. The site-specific regulations required are considered minor, and I think that the main issue here is with respect to the proposal and height. The site, as Laura indicated, is designated low-density residential, maximum, which permits a maximum building height of 12 meters. And so we are requesting amendment to allow for a maximum permitted height of 12 meters, which staff are supporting. So they are supporting the 12 meters. The 5th floor of the apartment building that we're proposing will add the additional height, but it does not add additional units or the intensity of what we're proposing to do in terms of the number of the density of the site. It's strictly to address the height. So as Laura had indicated in her presentation, there are evaluation criteria that are used to determine whether or not apartment buildings are appropriate within the low-density residential designation. I am of the opinion that all of the evaluation criteria that are required to meet, that that the official plan says we shall comply with, we meet. And I believe that the only difference that we have, a difference of opinion that we have with staff, is the locational criteria that are used to review the context of where the apartment building is located. And we have the benefit on this site is that it's very unique, and it is the increase in height to allow for the fifth floor greenhouse and amenity area does not have any impact on the low density residential neighborhood. It is well buffered with existing vegetation that screens that is around the perimeter of the site, along with the location of the townhouse units. As you can see from this picture, it's a unique enclave and of the property. And I'm not saying that I would suggest that a 5-story apartment building would be appropriate within the low density residential neighborhood, but in the locational context of this site, it has no impact on the existing low density neighborhood. It's on the periphery of a low density neighborhood. It's well separated from the low dense existing single detached homes. And there are no shadow impacts, as Rima will get into in her presentation. In terms of privacy or overlook issues with respect to the increase in height, there are no proposed units on the 5th story. So what we're really asking for is, in our proposal, is a unique proposition where we're proposing a unique building that has community benefit. Not only provides affordable housing, but provides this unique sustainable development that incorporates a greenhouse and a very unique common amenity area that will benefit the community and the residents of the Beechwood Co-op. So I will hand it over to Rima now for the balance of the presentation.
So my name is Rima Mazri. My office, Mazri Architects, is in Waterloo. I wanted to talk about just a few of the concepts from architectural point of view to explain some of the things that are being discussed. So one is the concept of fit. So height can be looked at as a component of how we establish a fit of a building within a neighborhood or within a complex of buildings. But it is only one of the criteria, and I, as an architect, I don't believe it's the strongest criteria. One has to look at the building form, I think foremost, as under the matter of fit, then as the expression, the architectural expression of how the building is put together, the materials, the colors, and the overall fabric that is established by putting all these buildings together. Definitely height is a consideration, but we all seen buildings that are high-rise, 10, 12, 20 stories, surrounded by much lower buildings, and you feel that there is enough fit because of good design practices. But on the matter of the height, I also want to explain that if we start with the 12 meters, where does that come from? Which is it seems it's more supportable in the context of planning and from staff point of view. That is a 4-story, each story being 3 meters, floor to floor, 10 feet. And that would result in a flat roof, because under the Waterloo zoning bylaw, the sloped roof will have to calculate half of that. So in the middle, if we were to add a sloped roof on top of the 4 stories and take the dimension to the middle of the slope roof, at a low slope that is 4 and 12, we'll get 15 meters. So same building, same density, 32 units, same floor-to-floor height, and there's a 3 meter that is needed just for the sloped roof. And in my opinion, a sloped roof would be a better fit in the neighborhood. What we're asking is the 5 stories, but in this case, we're using the attic space to put the greenhouse amenity in. And we're only asking for 1 more story more, 1 more meter more compared to a sloped roof on a 4-story building, which a lot of, from planning point of view, is seen as lower height. But I think the matter is more intricate than that. We can reduce height if we go to 8 feet ceilings as opposed to 9-foot ceilings. That would save about a meter, but I feel strongly about equity in the community with all the other apartment building standards being in the city being 9-foot ceilings. So I don't want to provide for this community lesser quality living space as part of our discussion how to resolve the height. So when we started this project 2 years ago, when we first met with staff, we wanted to add 6-story of residential, and then we lowered it to 4-story in respect of the height. At the time, we started, as Jennifer pointed out, with 13.5 meter. So we were much closer, but it took us 2 years to get here. And now with the zoning bylaw being changed, the numbers look like they're farther apart. But there are other reasons why we arrived here that I will explain. So in these sketches, the massing at the bottom and then the shadows, you see that in between the 12 meter, the 15 meter, and the 16 meter, there isn't really that much difference, because the sloped roof, as it bends internal to the building, it disappears in terms of its effect on the neighborhood. The shadows, we selected like one time afternoon in June, which being the most, like the worst case scenario, with the shadows being longer in the afternoon, and there is no legible difference. Now, why are we insisting on the 5th story? From the beginning, we wanted to include as much affordable housing as possible to serve as many residents as possible. We went with the one bedroom unit model because that seems the most need. But we also had this dream of doing something unique for the community. And through exploring ideas and meeting with the co-op, we thought of the greenhouse idea as a way to address some of the other things that communities, as our living changes and as we intensified inward, there are other things other than affordability that as a community we need to be thinking about for the future. So we looked at something the CMHC had as an innovation fund, they called it. And this was our idea of how to bring innovation into a residential neighborhood. And this allowed through access of funding from different levels of government trying to try something new. So we thought by bringing the greenhouse, we can tackle things like urban farming, nutrition, availability of healthy food in our communities, And it's a way to possibly provide employment, bring the community together around a core idea, and also access funding. So when we looked at the innovation fund under the CMHC criteria, there are 3 things they're looking for to evaluate eligibility for funding. One is a passive house. So we're trying to position this building to be designed and identified as meet the passive house criteria. Then accessibility. The CMHC has a different criteria for accessibility, much higher and multi-level than the OBC. So as illustrated by the colors, all the units will be accessible at a varying degrees, starting from the basic line of OBC and going upward and addressing maybe a variety of accessibility issues, not just mobility. And the third component is the innovation. So when we consulted with CMHC, they told us that there has to be a community angle to our application so that it would score higher in their criteria. So their advice was to include a kitchen or a community space that goes along with the greenhouse, so that it is more something that would address the community, bringing them together towards a concept. So we're hoping by positioning the project this way to make it more viable. The intent is to build this from public funds. So we talked to the region of Waterloo. We put an application. We're in conversation with them to access the provincial funding through the service provider at the region of Waterloo and through CMHC and through also some local community foundation. So by bringing all this together, we're hoping to address more than affordability. Affordability is very important. So I know we can talk about rules and numbers and so on, but what we care about is, and I'm sure you all feel the same, is putting people into homes. And that's what we're trying to do today. 32 people will have new homes. And then as overhoused people move from larger townhouses into smaller units, maybe some families can move into those houses. I think that's if we view this application in this light, we may see it differently. I know planning, we're here to talk about planning, but Councillor asked, how this happened or why is it difficult? It is very difficult for groups such as the co-op to bring such applications.
Ms. Masri, I'm going to have to ask that you wind up. I have permitted you to go over.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So if you can just wind up your
Yes.
comments, that would be terrific. Thank you.
But it is difficult to pull all the resources to bring a project up to this point. And this is our first step. After we get to a point where we're shovel ready, then we can access the funding. My last point is this is an excerpt from the official plan, which I see it as a commitment from the city in supporting of affordable housing, fast tracking. Then we are not asking for density bonusing, we're just asking for an extra height, and collaboration and financial relief. I just want to put it out there that at some point in the future we'll be coming to you to ask for help with the fees. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you. I will open it up to Councillor. Are there any questions for our first delegation? Councillor Vasic, then Mayor Jaworski, Councillor Bonagar, Councillor Bradley.
Thanks through Chair Hanmer. I do have my first question I asked earlier, but now after your presentation, I'm curious about what are the operational needs for the greenhouse? Because I don't know if that falls under regional at all. So what are the operational needs, and then how would they be provided for in the greenhouse and the kitchen space?
In terms of funding,
No, like operationally. So once you've built it, what are the needs to upkeep it, and what's the plan to keep it up in a sustainable way?
that's something we need to look into further and study a bit more. Right now, we're at a point where we're not sure if that's something that's going to happen. We hope that it happens. If it doesn't, then we're not going to pursue it anymore. But we did look at some point. We talked with some local farmers and people who do this type of rooftop type of gardening. So we have some idea how that's going to work. We looked into combining the photovoltaic with the light that's required for the greenhouse. So like we looked enough to know that we can make it happen, but the details will be in the building permit stage.
So I guess maybe my follow-up would be to staff, because I have no opinion of this right now. But so say we say, cool, 16 meters, no problem. But shouldn't we also know if there are particular regulations for upkeep and maintenance of the greenhouse and the kitchen as well? And just if that provides if any problems or challenges arose, if there's any risk to the people living in the building, do we have any jurisdiction or responsibility in that respect?
Through you, Chair Hanmer, we cannot do conditional zoning. So the decision to permit a 5-story, 60-meter building here, staff believe really has to stand on its own, because, and rather than rely on the building being a guaranteed affordable housing building and despite how it's operated, because zoning doesn't get into operational details. Even, despite how innovative they may be, it's just not something that zoning has any way of controlling.
Okay, thanks. Just a comment. I feel like, while I understand where that's coming from, I feel like this one's a hard one to divorce those from one another, because they do seem so connected. Like, part of the reason for the height is for the community space. So sort of, it feels to me like we have some sort of responsibility to but to have a strong feeling sense with some facts to demonstrate that would also be able to operate safely and et cetera. So just saying it because I'm curious about it. So maybe if that's part of the process along the way.
May I add?
Commissioner Rapp, no, the question was to staff. Commissioner Rapp had some information to add.
Certainly, through you, Chair Hammer, to Councillor Vasek. Coming back to the other question about the operational aspect of the greenhouse type of structure, the building division, depending on the class of structure and if it's proposed to be used in that manner, unlike houses that grow too many plants in them, we would be taking a look for proper ventilation, all the load, the capacity, all that type of thing, if we know it in advance. So we'd be making sure of all of those things for certain from a building code perspective. But the day-to-day operations, that would be worked out with the co-op, all that.
Thank you. And then my last question was just the first one that I asked, which is, how did this partnership, it seems like a partnership, how did it come about?
Just through passion and commitment to community needs. This was an area of interest of mine, and as I started to meet members of a co-op, my interests met their passion of 15 years ago when they tried to do this before. Somehow things didn't come together, and when I looked into the funding structure that's available through various levels of government, brought it to them. They believed me that we can put something together, and it's been a 2-year journey, and a lot hinges now on this zoning application, because as we get it to shovel ready, then we can apply for funding.
Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. Hello, Rima. One of my questions from the last time asking Laura was, where's all the surface parking? And I think I spotted in Jennifer's presentation that the additional surface parking is all along the edge of what's currently the green space. Is that,
Yeah.
that's the 42 new spots?
Most of it is on the edges,
Yeah.
and there's 2 pockets at the end where we squeezed a few more parking spaces. So one is beside the circle and one is on the other end.
Okay, thank you, Rima.
Councillor Bonagor.
Through you, Chair Hanma. I'm just curious, given the placement of the proposed building, it seems to be like in what is currently the green heart of the co-op. So where do you envision, and this may be for you or for someone else on the team, where would kids go to play, dogs go to run around, and the rest? What happens to that, the green space that's currently there? Is there space for that elsewhere?
With that green space, although we would lose some trees, but that green space is not currently usable because it is a dry storm pit. So it is deep and it gets filled with water, so it's not really a usable space. There is a children play area that we're maintaining, which is to the left of the current community building. So we're not touching that. And that's also one other motivation why we wanted to add the greenhouse, is to compensate some of the green area, but in a more urban fashion.
Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through your chair, Henmer. Is the intention for the greenhouse kitchen to be used only for the residents within this development or for the broader co-op in general?
The intent is for the co-op. I don't know if the rules would allow them. Everybody?
For staff? Okay. Do you want to ask your questions of staff now? Go right ahead.
Thank you. Do we have anything within our zoning permissions or within our authority that would allow us to permit the height but not allow residences on that 5th floor?
All right, through your chair, Hanmer, the bylaw could be structured, I believe, to prohibit units on the 5th story.
And given that, I would ask the applicant whether they would have an issue with that.
I don't believe we would have an issue with that. No.
And my last question, without fettering the process, if we wanted to fast track the approval process, given that it has an affordable housing component, what would that look like, and how would we initiate that?
Through you, Chair Hanmer, I think we, as at a staff level, would just prioritize this project in our workload potentially, and I would also add, while Joel's coming up here, that the amount of detail and the level of opinion that we're sharing tonight is sort of I've also met with the applicant already, and we've had some conversations. That is my attempt to sort of move this file along, whereas typically we wouldn't maybe give this level of detail or opinion or have some of those conversations until after the informal. So the applicant could also at this point submit a site plan pre-consultation meeting. So I think at my level, I've made an effort to kind of keep this moving forward at a good pace.
Mr. Cotter, you have some information to share.
Through Chair Hamner, just to expand on to what Laura said, we would do whatever was within our control to expedite the review of the application. We would also use our collaboration with our community partners who are commenting on this to emphasize the importance of the project and ask for maybe a higher level of service from those entities. Because a lot of the iterations that go on in these applications is issues resolution. So again, if we can reach out to our counterparts and ask them to review this application in priority of other applications, again, we can try and advance the process as quickly as we can. But it's an issue of allocating staff resources, and from our perspective, affordable housing is something that's needed within the community, and we put it at the top of near the top of our list of applications we have to deal with.
Great, thank you. Clarification?
I appreciate everything that you said there, and I believe that planning staff also think that affordable housing is a priority. So thank you for the commentary there. I'm just curious if there's anything that you would need from council direction to fast track the process if that was something that council so desired.
Through Councillor Hamner, no, we don't need a specific resolution of council. We would prioritize it. The only caveat I would add is we have, as Mr. Rapp alluded to in the business plans today, our legislative obligations. So those always have to be dealt with first, and then next in line would be these types of applications, and then our day-to-day work.
And Councillor Vasic.
Thanks, Chair. I forgot to ask one of my questions. One of the things I'm curious about is that we've had some informal meetings where we've been told that that the pro forma wouldn't be able to be met. And this seems like a high cost, not as high return investment for you potentially. So I don't know if I'm right on that. So one, are you going to be able to meet that? And two, is there any risk to doing such a high community benefit project to it not happening if you don't have the money to do it? If that is a risk, are you able to meet your pro forma?
Well, I'm not approaching this as a developer where I'm looking at the return on investment. The hope is that we'll be able to build this with public funds, and that's the reason for the early discussions with the region of Waterloo and with CMHC. So we already put an application to the region of Waterloo last year, and they listed us as at concept level. I'm not clear exactly what the amount of funding that they will allocate to us. That can only be clear as we finish working drawings and we develop our budgets. So we have to go through this process without having all the answers. But that's how the process works. I believe we have a really good chance with CMHC innovation funding, and that's why the reason that we're trying to hit every one of their criteria so that we rank high in their evaluation system. But we're working as we go. Thank you.
And Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair Henmer, and certainly thank you both to Jennifer and to Rima for presentation and Q&A thus far. Curious about a few things and some to confirm. I wanted to pick up on the question of how the partnership emerged and how this process sort of emerged. I'm wondering if someone could speak to the co-op's process in terms of its decision making to come forward, because often what we would see, the impact of a tall building in a low density area, or a mid-sized sort of building in a low density area, is the immediate adjacent neighbors have filled the chambers and tell us a lot of often very terrible things, whether or not they're based in reality or fact. We hear lots of stuff, but the immediate neighbors here are the co-op members. So I'm curious as to their process and their level of consensus around submitting the application.
I wonder if we do have the co-op as the next delegation.
I can't see on my sheet who's coming up.
Yeah, so
I'm happy to have them answer that if that would be
perhaps
preferable.
we can hold that question for them. Anything else, Councillor Henry?
Yes, and I'm curious about, we danced around and said that this is an affordable housing project. I'm wondering if someone could tell me what they mean by that. Because there's lots of definitions of affordable housing, and I'm curious what the applicant in this case means by affordable housing and the mix on the site.
So we discussed that last week with the co-op, so they can provide more information on that. But quickly, as I understand it, their levels go market level, but their market level is lower than the real market level, and then it goes to subsidized, then geared to income. So from that, what I understood that their geared to income and their subsidized is actually lower than the definition in terms of amount of rent than the region of Waterloo definition of as affordable being 20% less than the market value, because their market value rent is already at close or at affordable to begin with, and then it goes down from there.
So I think I'll look for more detail when they come up. So I think that's a really important component, because when we say affordable housing, people hear 6 different things. So it's really important to know which thing we're hearing when that's something we're talking about. And the last one I have, and this is, I think the site plan piece that came up. I was trying to read the very small print setbacks. I know when we have mid or high rise zones adjacent to low rise zones, we have setback criteria that buildings are required to meet on those kinds of sites, and that's 7.5 meters or half the height of the building, whichever is more in that case. I'm just curious as to how this building relative to its adjacent neighbors on the same site would compare to the criteria we use when we have intensified things in nodes and corridors adjacent to low-rise residential.
Yeah, I believe we have 8 meters to the back of the immediate townhouses in the back.
Okay. Any further questions for this delegate? Rima and Jennifer, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. I will call on our next group. There are 4, Shelley Millatz, Rosemary Jones, Christine Post, and John Stryker. And I'll remind you that the delegate combined have 10 minutes.
Oh, good. It is 10 minutes just combined. All right. My name is Rosemary Jones. I'm one of the tenants at Beechwood Cooperative Incorporated Homes. I've been a member at Beechwood for 20 years now. When I first moved to Beechwood, our coordinator and the board were trying to buy the adjacent property to build 1-bedrooms and 4-bedroom townhouses. We were approved, we went through the process, but then there was an issue with the cul-de-sac there on Herb Street, the court. It actually wasn't a court yet at that point. So we walked away because of the cost of having to do the court. We weren't able to do that. We were able to fund buying the land and building. However, that was something that wasn't foreseen when we applied. Fast track to 2015, we attempted again. We applied to the region, and we were turned down. Our application was turned down at that point because it didn't have enough meat to it, and the region did say they would like to work with us in order to be able to do this. So we looked at purchasing the adjacent property again. However, it didn't, the price of it it wasn't going to be feasible. So we looked at our property and said, what can we do here to help our aging population? All of our children, so many of our children are growing and moving on, and we're holding affordable housing at a larger unit number more than what we need, because a lot cannot move out and pay full market rent that's out there right now. I'm sure you're all aware that 1-bedrooms, 2-bedrooms, 3-bedrooms, 4-bedrooms, we're all anywhere between $1,300 to $2,100 for 2 bedrooms. When you're living on a limited income, or you've been at a market and you're trying to raise a family and you've got kids to put through university, being able to move out of a larger unit into a 1-bedroom in our community where we're familiar is ideal, not only for some of us that are there and at the last count and kind of review to come tonight to be a bit prepared. We have probably 10 units that could move into the market price or market in a building like that, freeing up 10 units of 2, 3, and 4 bedroom housing. That's just going to then keep that sort of moving on top of being able to offer the additional units to the waiting list. So this is why we're here. This has been really well thought out. This project here, I met the architect at a forum for cooperative housings. We have them 2 times a year. We offer courses. We take courses on all kinds of different subjects. She was there speaking on affordable housing. And I said to her, how can we move forward? This would be our 3rd kick at the can. Would love to be able to do this, not just for our community, but for Kitchener-Waterloo in a whole, because it is needed. It is terribly needed. And it's not just needed for the single moms or, you know, people who are down on luck. It's needed for our children. Some of our children can't afford to go out and rent coming out of university with a university loan. My oldest son is 30 years old and he's still living at home. Why? Because he has a 4-year university loan that needs to be paid off, and he didn't get a job 6-figure like he thought he would when he came out. So it's not just, you know, I think it affects society as a whole, and we haven't really built much in the last 20 years for any kind of affordable housing. And you know, we have the land, it's our property. We're a very well-run co-op in Waterloo. Our numbers speak for ourselves with what we have in our own reserves and what we have as an operating budget. We've always been a very positive influence in the area in Waterloo. We have every year, this year was the first year we had it in a while, had a skating rink for our kids. Every summer we have a carnival that the public, like Beechwood, anyone is able to come to. This past summer we had Batman there, we had, like, it was a great time. You know, we do fireworks every year. We're not just housing. It's a family. And, you know, we're trying to offer that for others and for ourselves. So any questions? Please feel free.
Rosemary, thank you very much. We can see that you are very passionate about the proposal, so I appreciate it. I'll just give you a few minutes.
Sometimes too much so, but I see the need. I've worked downtown Kitchener on the streets dealing with homelessness, and with the city of Waterloo and bylaw, with the region at the bus terminal. I've seen a lot of stuff out there, and you know, some people don't want the help, but there's a lot that do, and there's a lot that should be able to have a roof over their head. And if we're able to put 32 units on that map, then kudos to us. Kudos to Waterloo as far as I'm concerned. Like, it's needed.
Thank you. I will open it up to Council. Council Henry, do you want to forward your questions? You're holding. Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Rosemary, for coming out. Regarding your application to the region, you said you're working with them, but ideally this is something that you would want to become part of the cooperative complex, that cooperative commitment, so to speak. Like, I think when you're working with the region, you have really different opportunities. For example, you can have 20 years affordable housing and then it goes to market rates. But in a lot of cases like supportive housing of Waterloo, YWCA, their commitments are essentially in perpetuity. What are you looking for from the region?
Okay, so from the region, we're actually going to be meeting with them Thursday morning at 10:30 to further discuss it. We had spoken with the region about, I'm going to say, two and a half years ago. We had Cindy DeFall, who was our area manager, and our architect and the board and members. They were at the co-op and we spoke. And so we asked, how do we do this, right? Because we have 78 units, which is already established, and it's part of the co-op, and we want to rebuild. And then how does that affect the 78? So in essence, what will happen is we still have the entity of our 78 existing units, sort of under one umbrella. This would be a second entity to our business, like to the cooperative as a separate entity, and would run on its own merit and budget. So it would, when we meet with the region and we have like a better concise plan as to, yeah, we've got this, we've dotted this, we've crossed the X here, we've got the approval to build, then they would come with us and work on whether we would do RGI, whether it would be RGI, non-for-profit type calculations, or the market style where it's like the 20%. We just received from the region on Monday of this week, excuse me, a whole new formula. So this is actually a good time to be having these discussions with the region, because it's all changing as of July 2020 on how housing is calculated, how things are submitted, what's being used, that sort of thing. So meeting on Thursday, I don't have all the answers right now because we meet on Thursday, but there's definitely, how we work it right now is we are 78 units, 18, I believe 18 are market rent, or what we considered, and the rest are all subsidized to a degree. So based on your income, it's 30% of what your income is. So if you make $30,000, you're paying 30% of that towards your housing. So whether it will be that moving forward, or like the how it's done on the one on Herb Street, the Herb and University, they built, the region assisted in building one there, and it's based more on the affordability. It's a different matrix, so it's really going to be how the region works with us. But
you've given a lot of thought, is what I'm hearing, and that's your intention is to, affordability is key to your intention.
It's definitely affordability. Like out of these units, out of the 32 units, I'm going to say possibly 12 will be the market or whatever is sort of what we design, like is designated by the region for that. The rest are going to be, geared to income, or however that formula is going to be for affordable housing, because it's what the need is affordable housing.
Councillor Henry.
So that's a decent answer. Probably as good an answer as you can provide me to one of my questions, because it sounds like there's more meetings to be able to refine those. So I won't press you, because that's a work in progress. But I'll take what I got today as and I think staff will as well, as understanding a broad direction of where your head's at, recognizing the exact numbers are going to manage themselves as the region helps manage you, and however this process will work. So I'll leave you my other question, which you alluded to, how the co-op itself over time has been looking for doing this. But can you tell me just a little bit more about how the co-op has that discussion, and in terms of how this decision to do this on your property, co-op is a different kind of decision-making model than, say, this place or many other things. So can you just give us a sense of sort of the consensus approach, or where the head of everybody in there is at to get here? Yeah.
So I'm just going to do it with this one, because the other two, it doesn't really matter. We didn't build. This one we really want to hopefully be able to move forward with. So this concept, this idea came about, like I said, in approximately 2015 or 16. Our previous coordinator, we applied to the region. The region said, great, but not enough meat. You need to go back to the drawing board and provide something, and we'll work with you, or we'll hopefully be able to work with you. Between then, I went to this seminar, met Rima, brought her back, sent her an email and said, how do we do this? Like, we've been here twice, and we get so far, and then we end up not getting past this point. So we met with her. She came out, met with the board. We've held town halls at the co-op where members were invited to come to the town hall. Notices went out to them to attend to our community center to discuss and be informed of what the board was attempting to do. Let's see, so that would have been, I think, 2000, I was just looking at it last night. The meeting was April 30th, 2018. That was one of the town hall meetings. But prior to that, we had been working with Rima and her company, developing stuff every AGM and every ABM. So we have 2 meetings mandatory a year that members are to attend. It is on the agenda, and it's called the New Build. And we bring it up to the membership that does come to the meetings, and then it's put in the minutes for members to review, that, this is where we're at with the new build. This is where we're at with the new build. So from 2000, I'm going to say probably 2016 that we met, 2017. So you have 2, 4, 6, The 7th one will be in February. So we've had 7 AGM meetings where this is always on the agendas for members and to tell them an update. And after the next step here, if this is approved and we go to the region and we get more information and we can get the funding or start working on the funding, there will be more town halls. It's just not very easy to hold a town hall if you haven't got the information to provide to the members, which just kind of confuses them more because they think, oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like nobody. So the more information we can have, the better, and then we'll be able to display the protocol of what we're looking at, or that prototype, around our community center on the stands, that members can come up and take a look at them anytime the office or the community center is open, so that they can get a feel of it. So.
I'm just going to ask a clarifying question since it's on that light. Thank you for sharing with us the process. Can you give us any insight into where the co-op members are sitting right now with regard to the new development? Just give us a picture of where things are at, recognizing there's lots of steps still to go.
I'm not going to stand here and say, oh, everybody's happy about it, because I'm pretty sure some are not. Mm-hmm. Some of them are ill-informed or don't want to be informed per se. Mm-hmm. The information is put out there. And I make sure that the information has been put out there in our meetings, whatnot, because it's important. This is a big change, and it's going to be a change for probably 2 years while we build this. So they have to be informed. So some are happy, some are like questioning, well, where are we going to park? What are we going to do? All that sort of thing. And my answer to that is, the parking we're putting in as you can see on this picture, but every single unit in the cooperative right now has 2 parking spaces, their garage and their driveway. Mm-hmm. So it's not like parking, it should be an issue because we have that in every unit. If you choose to use your garage as storage, that, it's still a parking spot. So to me, I think you need to kind of look at that, But on the whole, I think they're warming up to it. But we don't have enough town halls right now because we haven't got really the information
to share,
to put to them, right?
Sure.
So, they are anticipating it. I know the older generation, like myself, would love to have a 1-bedroom so my kids can't come back home. I would love it. I like.
Now there's the real answer.
But, I just think it fits, it works. When you see this, you kind of think, oh, that's so big. But this is down lower than the rest of the property, this level, much lower. So it's not going to be this big scathing thing in the middle of Beechwood that everybody's going to be seeing and going, oh my God. Half the people in Beechwood don't even know we have the ring road in and around in that co-op.
Yeah. No, and that's a fair comment too. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions for this delegate? Okay. Rosemary, you were on our list twice.
Right.
So I'm trying to understand.
I'm just greedy, I guess. No. It was kind of a mistake. However, I would like to address the green space comments. Someone had asked about the green space. Okay. So right now, how our cooperatives, we have this big pit that in the winter's amazing because when it snows, we make ramps and we, slide down it. The kids love it. It's like a little mini hill to them. This is where it's going. So we still have another half, like soccer field just about, of green space. Like, I invite you all to come out and take a look around the site because you don't know what's behind there until you actually go in and see it. Like, you think it's small, but it's huge. And the play area, same thing. That's not going to be even touched. This here is more so in the area of where it's pretty useless in the most part, so just to answer that one.
Okay, great, thank you. So that does bring us to the end of our registered delegates. As this is an informal meeting, I will ask if there's anyone else present tonight who wishes to speak to council and to this application. And if so, please make your way to the podium and tell us your name and municipality of residence.
I'm Michelle O'Donnell. I'm a chair on the board of directors and a member of the co-op. Pardon me, I got really bad stage fright, so. I'm just going to read something that I prepared for tonight. We as Beechwood Co-op are thankful for this opportunity and have the ability to better our community as a whole, with a high need for affordable housing, healthy living, and well-being. We hope to be a part of this new build and the possibilities it has to connect diverse people of the region and at the community level. We as a co-op are thankful for the opportunity to try and create a model in which can be used in other places and builds that make stronger opportunities of changing and growing healthy and happy communities. With minimal investment and volunteer efforts in growing microgreens, reinvesting profits in building clients, and interest in harvested greens opens the door for establishing a solid platform that gives us the ability to grow. It's undeniable the benefits of community has in having access to growing herbs, vegetables, microgreens all year round, affordable, healthy eating education, and wellness support, and having space to promote it. We think building a rooftop greenhouse and community kitchen and wellness space would be an important addition to the new build, as it would have a positive effect on all communities' need to grow up and grow old in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just hang on one second. Are there any questions for this delegate from council? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I do see a gentleman in the corner. You were raising your hands. Do you wish to address council? No, it's not a time to ask questions of the others. Is there anyone else who wishes to address council? Please come to the podium, state your name and your place of residence.
Thank you very much. My name is John Stryker. I live at the Beechwood Cooperative Homes as well, and some familiar faces here and there. Thank you very much. I appreciate this moment. The seeds, to answer one question, the seeds of this began with Keith Moyer, our first coordinator, when he was talking about the exploring of opportunities to build. It was between two or three of us that this conversation started, which ended up going nowhere, as you heard in a previous comment. The reason why we're so passionate about it, or why we're concerned about it, I'm the real life story. I lost my professional job in Windsor back in 1996. 2 children, and I was looking at no place to live except for my parents in a 900 square foot home in Bridgeport, only 1 bedroom. It was my brother that gave me information about co-ops. I had no idea what that was. As I was driving around Waterloo, I happened to see this beautiful new building just off of Herbsville Drive. I said, what the heck is that? So I turned in, and sure enough, that's where I found an opportunity. I couldn't believe it. A 3-bedroom, a deck, a basement, a garage, everything for way less than I could have ever imagined. Now that was affordable now for me. It gave me a new start. I had family and friends in the area. So it began for me to say, well, look, if this is a privilege I can have, surely there's others that out there that have it, and that's, or need it. And that's where I met Rose, because she came through the door, and I interviewed Rose as part of a committee to help understand cooperative housing. And you can see how passionate she is. So my only comment to that is I appreciate the first decisions that allowed for Beechwood Co-op to be established, which came through the region, which came through the government, which came through Waterloo. So I thank you. I thank you for that privilege, and I thank you for considering this very seriously. I do appreciate it.
John, thank you very much for sharing your story with us.
That was it.
Again, please hold on for a second and see if there are any questions from council. Seeing none, thank you very much. And a final call, is there anyone else who wishes to address council this evening? Please come forward, state your name and your municipality of residence.
My name is Shelley Militz. I'm the board president of Beechwood Co-op. As you could have heard, we have a huge amount of passion for this project. I was one of the founding members of Beechwood Co-op, so I've been there through all these trials and tribulations of trying to do a build, trying to better our community, trying to help other families the way we've been helped. It's been through REMA and other people that have helped us, and we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, we hope. We're hoping that we have everything in place to continue on with this move. It is important to us. Somebody had asked about how we had the community involved. We did send a survey to each member asking them what they thought we should do, what kind of housing we should have, whether it be 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. And the majority of the people did say 1 bedroom. As Rose said, we are getting to be an older generation. So our kids are out, and if you're paying a market rent, then you can move into a 1 bedroom apartment, and that opens it up for other people. So it's kind of a win-win situation that we're hoping we can move forward with.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions for this delegate? Jen?
Oh.
Councillor Vassic.
Jen's good. Through you, Chair Hanmer. I just when you said the 1 bedroom and you're as the co-op ages, it made me realize this is 4 stories, right? 4 stories of apartments.
Right.
So out of curiosity,
Yes.
is this a building that you can age into without an elevator? Like really, really age into?
There's plans for an elevator, correct?
Oh,
yes.
Great. Sorry, I totally missed that.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
because it's all accessible, because we want to be able to, we've had some older members in there that they're not ready for a retirement home. They still can live on their own, but the elevator, the accessibility of it would be better. Like we're talking handrails for the bathrooms. Like it's all a big learning curve for all of us, but until we get approval, we're not going to do a lot of that kind of planning yet. You're welcome.
Any further questions for the delegate? No? Shelley, thank you
Thank
very,
you.
very much. If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. So again, thank you to everyone who participated and is in attendance this evening. We do have a couple more items to just go through quickly. Consideration of notice of motion. There weren't notice of motion given at previous meetings. There were none. There are 2 notices of motions that are coming from me for discussion at our next meeting. So I will leave those for your information. We have no communications or correspondence. Are there any, or no unfinished business? Are there any items of new business for council to consider? I'd just like to, again, do a shout out to all of our staff who worked this weekend round the clock, really, to make sure that the city was prepared as best it could be for the something happening with the weather, the event that, knock on wood, thankfully didn't transpire as much as we had hoped. But I think our shout out to our IPPW staff as well as our community services staff who were looking and making sure that we were safe through the weekend. So thank you very much for that. We have some bylaws to enact. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Bodley. A seconder, Councillor Henry. All in favor? That is all of us. And finally, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Veith? Oh my goodness, there's so many. We are adjourned. The sick ones can move it. Thank you, everybody.